Title: Shadows over Sevastopol, A Tale of War and Honor. Prologue: The Gathering Storm. 1853. The world stood on the precipice of war. In the heart of Europe, tensions between the great powers ignited a conflict that would change history: the Crimean War. Among the soldiers preparing for battle were Captain William Ashford, a British officer seeking glory, and Colonel Ivan Petrov, a veteran Russian commander determined to defend his homeland. Their destinies were intertwined by fate, leading them to the bloody fields of Crimea. Chapter 1. The March to War. With war declared, British and French forces sailed to the Black Sea to aid the Ottoman Empire against Russia. Ashford, eager for action, found himself amidst a grand coalition, while Petrov, stationed in Crimea, received orders to fortify the Russian strongholds. As the armies mobilized, both men prepared for what they believed would be a short, decisive campaign. They were wrong. Chapter 2. The Battle of Alma. The first major clash came at the River Alma. The Allies launched a daring assault against Russian defensive positions. Ashford led his men up the steep bluffs, witnessing the carnage of war firsthand. Meanwhile, Petrov, rallying his soldiers under relentless fire, saw his carefully laid defenses crumble. The battle ended in a Russian retreat, but both men knew the war was far from over. Chapter 3. The Siege of Sevastopol begins. Determined to break Russian resistance, the Allies laid siege to the strategic city of Sevastopol. Trapped inside, Petrov oversaw the defenses, knowing surrender was not an option. Outside the city, Ashford and his comrades endured harsh conditions, disease, and relentless counterattacks as they dug in for a long war. Chapter 4. The Charge of the Light Brigade. A fateful miscommunication led to one of history's most infamous cavalry charges. Ashford, watching in horror, saw British horsemen ride into a valley of death, cut down by Russian artillery. Among the defenders was Petrov, who admired the enemy's courage even as he ordered his cannons to fire. The tragedy of war was on full display. Chapter 5. The Harsh Winter. The bitter winter of 1854-55 tested both sides. Disease and starvation ravaged the Allied camps, while Russian soldiers endured the brutal cold within Sevastopol. Ashford fell ill but was nursed back to health by Florence Nightingale's revolutionary medical care. Meanwhile, Petrov faced internal struggles as morale among his men plummeted. Chapter 6. The Spies of Balaclava. As the siege dragged on, espionage and sabotage became weapons of war. Ashford was tasked with uncovering Russian informants among the Allies, while Petrov received intelligence on British weaknesses. Their paths nearly crossed in a deadly game of deception. Chapter 7. The Battle of Inkerman. A brutal, fog-covered battle erupted in November 1854. Russian forces launched a surprise attack, nearly breaking through Allied lines. Ashford fought desperately in the chaos, his sword clashing with Russian bayonets. Petrov led his men with valor, but the Allies held firm. The failed assault marked another devastating loss for Russia. Chapter 8. The French Assault. As months passed, the French army took a more prominent role. Their decisive attack on Malakoff proved a turning point in the siege. Ashford witnessed the ferocity of the French assault, while Petrov desperately tried to reinforce his crumbling defenses. The walls of Sevastopol began to crack. Chapter 9. The Fall of Sevastopol. After nearly a year under siege, Sevastopol fell. Petrov, wounded and exhausted, led a desperate retreat as Russian forces abandoned the city. Ashford, now hardened by war, entered the ruins of the once mighty stronghold, realizing the cost of victory. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The war ended in 1856 with the Treaty of Paris, but its scars remained. Ashford returned home a decorated officer, though haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. Petrov, now a disgraced survivor, retreated into obscurity, knowing he had given everything for his country. Chapter 11. The Road to Recovery. Ashford struggled to adjust to peacetime, haunted by the memories of lost comrades. He found solace in writing, detailing his experiences in an effort to warn future generations about the horrors of war. Meanwhile, Petrov, exiled to a remote post, reflected on his failures and vowed to rebuild his shattered reputation. Chapter 12: The Political Fallout. The Crimean War reshaped European politics. In London, Ashford observed heated debates about military reforms and the role of Britain on the world stage. Petrov, now back in Russia, saw the Tsar introduce sweeping changes to modernize the Russian army, though many resented the defeat. Chapter 13: The Duel of Honor. A bitter rival of Petrov, blaming him for Sevastopol's fall, challenged him to a duel. Though reluctant, Petrov accepted, knowing his honor was at stake. The duel, fought in secrecy, ended in his victory, but left him questioning whether honor was worth the bloodshed. Chapter 14: A Chance Encounter. Years later, fate brought Ashford and Petrov to the same diplomatic gathering in Paris. No longer enemies, they spoke as survivors of a war that had taken so much from them. Their conversation revealed a mutual respect forged through battle. Chapter 15: The War's Forgotten Heroes. As time passed, the world moved on, but those who fought in Crimea were not easily forgotten. Ashford lobbied for better recognition of soldiers' sacrifices, while Petrov sought to honor those who had died defending their homeland. Chapter 16: The Next Generation. Both men trained young officers, passing on lessons learned from their experiences. Ashford mentored future British leaders, warning against reckless conflicts, while Petrov, reinstated in the Russian military, emphasized the importance of strategy and resilience. Chapter 17: A War Remembered. The Crimean War reshaped Europe, introducing modern warfare, revolutionizing military medicine, and proving that war was never as simple as the politicians made it seem. The soldiers who fought, whether British, French, Russian, or Ottoman, left behind a legacy of sacrifice and survival. Epilogue: Legacy of the Fallen. Years later, as monuments were erected and history books recorded their deeds, Ashford and Petrov reflected on their place in history. They had fought for their nations but had gained something greater, an understanding of the true cost of war. This is the tale of Sevastopol, of honor and war, of men who fought for their nations but found respect in the eyes of their enemies.